Hey friends, I'm Christy, and you're listening to Rock the Damn Boat. If you've ever bitten your tongue to keep the peace or said yes when every part of you wanted to say no, this one's for you. We're diving into the messy, real stuff that people pleasers like me have spent years avoiding. It's time to have the hard conversations, shake things up, and learn to stand tall, even when it makes waves. My May conversations here on the podcast represent different chapters of my life. Danny Carr is a sober coach out of Australia. She is leaning into the yoga and mindfulness space, much like I did in my sobriety. Her and I have very close dates, and we talked about everything related to this sober lifestyle and the gifts of it. And I hope you'll go back and listen to that episode. I'll be speaking to someone who is in animal advocacy, and my journey with PetSmart and launching me into the pet industry all stemmed from pet rescue. And so I'm excited to have that conversation with Lori. And then my dear friend Beckie is a nonprofit consultant, and she was also a yoga teacher at my studio. And it's so funny because we really don't talk about yoga, but I'm grateful to have her in my life. I am thrilled to have my guest on today. She is a dear personal friend and really making waves in the nonprofit space. Beckie Irvin is here, and she is a nonprofit founder and sought-after consultant in the social sector. With a decade of experience in outdoor education, Beckie has a passion for combining her love of the outdoors with her drive to make a positive impact on her community. She uses her skills in leadership, fundraising, and strategic planning to help organizations effectively address social issues and achieve their goals. Beckie believes wholeheartedly in the value that nonprofits bring to their communities, and she sees it as her mission to provide them with the training and support that founders and staff need in order to find success in the early to mid stages of nonprofit growth. Beckie's big heart is the reason I love her so much. Welcome to the show, Beckie.
Thank you, Christy. I'm so happy to be here.
Well, I'm thrilled to have you. We are having some conversations with women in the nonprofit space. And so, of course, you were the first to come to mind since that is what you do day in and day out. So tell the listeners a little bit about what you do.
I have been in and around nonprofits since 2013. I love this space. Ever since I was a little girl, all I wanted to do was work in nonprofits and make the world a better place. And I think a lot of people in our field feel the same way. That being said, I also have gone through an experience that I would say the majority of people in the nonprofit space go through as well, which is all the way to burnout and even past it into clinical burnout or burnout that significantly impacts our physical and mental health. And I have also had the experience of healing from that and coming back all the way from that. That experience informs a lot of what we do at Beckie Irvin Consulting and Research. I own a consulting practice. I take on nonprofit clients. Most of them are in the small to mid-size space. And if you're not in this industry, small to mid-size typically means like it could be anywhere from an annual operating budget of $300,000 and all part-time staff all the way up to like 25 million. And maybe you have a team of 30 full-time staff and a museum or something. So it's a wide range of nonprofits that we work with, and we work with them to stabilize their fundraising efforts and also optimize operations. And then we also do leadership training. Our values are that healthy nonprofits make the world go round. We also believe that nonprofit pros deserve living and comfortable wages. Like, just because you work at a nonprofit doesn't mean you shouldn't have the financial means to also enjoy your life. We don't advocate for people to get paid so much that they can afford a private yacht or a private jet, but like they should be able to afford at least one nice vacation a year and the ability to get to their families at Christmas time. And then we also believe that fundraising and working in this sector shouldn't cause burnout. When I say that we work with nonprofits to stabilize fundraising and operations and train up leadership, that it's all rooted in this mission and philosophy to like get nonprofits to a place where people freaking love to come to work. And we believe that when people love to come to work, they also do their best work. And so that's what we are about. That's the heart of what we do.
Well, I love that. Know that so many people have a passion or cause that they might donate to, and they don't think about what all goes on behind the scenes. And just to boil it down to the basics, a nonprofit company, is it solely donation led?
Not necessarily. We do help our nonprofits build what we call a grant seeking strategy or a pipeline of grants that they can seek out. Typically, grants are funded through private foundations. So if you think of like a philanthropist, like Bill and Melinda Gates, they have their foundation set up and they give grants to these certain projects that support their specific interest. And then there's also federal grants. Like if you're a rural town and your population is like below a certain income level, then you could maybe apply for a grant from the U.S. Department of Agriculture to build a community center or a playground. And then there's also what we call program fees. So a nonprofit isn't necessarily required to give their services away for free. Now, there are a lot who do. For example, a food pantry is not going to turn away someone because they can't afford to pay for food. But then there also might be some people that they ask them to pay what they can. And so that would be considered like a program fee. If you drop $5 in the jar or $10 or you pay $1 a can. Same thing with like your local library probably offers a lot of free programs. And then they also probably offer some programs at discounted rates. So actually, the local library is a great resource for nonprofits because they'll usually host workshops with these amazing consultants whose time might normally be $150 to $250 per hour, but you get to attend a workshop with them for $25.
Wow.
So,
Okay.
yeah, and all of that goes into nonprofit funding or
Okay.
like a nonprofit revenue model if you want the
Okay.
jargon for it.
Right. That's what I'm thinking about. For those of us who aren't as familiar with the inner workings, then it would be, donations and grants and these program fees, like you mentioned, all go into that's the income for this nonprofit. And
Exactly.
then all of the things like operating expenses and salaries are part of that. And then what's left is net zero, right? That's why it's nonprofit. None of those profits are going to inflate salaries or things like that.
Yeah, so at the end of the year, a nonprofit is required to, if they have a carryover, it's required that all of that money is designated to a charitable cause. And as long as like the people who are working at the nonprofit are contributing to the charitable cause, you can raise their salaries to match market value or to increase with the cost of living adjustment. You can pay people well. One thing that you have to report on your 990 is salaries versus your program expenses. And if you're applying for a grant, a funder will look at those ratios. And if those ratios are really off, it's kind of
Mm.
a red flag.
Thank you for walking us through kind of what that entails because it's
Yeah,
so much, when you're working for a corporation, the whole point is to make a profit. And
right.
certainly, like I said, we're all involved with a nonprofit in some way in our lives. I volunteered for Meals on Wheels for
Sure.
years and love people in the animal rescue space. But yeah, just helping us understand that. So, what are the most common types of nonprofits that you work with specifically?
So I primarily work with nonprofits in the outdoor recreation space or parks and recreation. I also work with a lot of local municipalities. So, like the Chamber of Commerce might want to renovate some historical building downtown, and there's federal grant funding for that. We would work with them to help them build that grant proposal. We also work like a lot of really small Chamber of Commerce are run by part time people. We work with them to build a more sustainable operating budget so they can get those people up to reasonable wages and salaries and cover things like basic health insurance. And then I also work with nonprofits in the arts and culture spaces, so like museums, fine arts, performance theaters, things like that.
I feel like there are so many more organizations structured as nonprofit that I realized in the
Yes.
world because I didn't think about things like libraries and museums
Yeah.
being nonprofit.
Yep.
There's a much bigger need for this than, like I said, that I'm realizing just because there's so many different organizations that operate that way.
Yes.
That's exciting to have such a diverse background and work that you do because I think that to me the things those two spaces bring to mind joy. So
Yeah.
we find joy in art, we find joy in outdoor spaces. What is one of the most exciting projects that you've worked on or something that maybe you helped bring to life?
Well, I'm a little biased because I founded my own nonprofit in 2019. And I have been through just about every role within that nonprofit that you can. I've been the founder, which is like, you do everything, you wear all the hats. I have been the fundraiser and the grant writer and the strategist. I fundraised enough money to hire our first executive director. So I've been through like the leadership hiring process. I was fairly young, so I wouldn't say I did it well, learned a lot, but moved into the role of board chair, stepped away from the board of directors, and now I work as their fundraiser. It has been the highlight of my career to start and grow this nonprofit. It's called All Bikes Welcome. It exists primarily in Fayetteville and Bentonville, Arkansas, which we call the Northwest Arkansas Corridor. And we teach people to ride mountain bikes, which is an outdoor sport that has a lot of what we call barriers to entry. So it's really expensive. A lot of people don't necessarily know where to do it or where to learn. There's some fears around safety, like, am I going to get hurt doing this sport? Should I do it alone? Should I have a buddy with me? And then there's also just a lot of knowledge of like how to keep a bicycle maintained so that it's safe and also fun to ride. And something that you mentioned was like how many of these nonprofits provide services that bring us joy. And one thing we know about joy from being in this space and doing so much research and grant writing work in the outdoor recreation space is that when people experience joy, it directly correlates to like individual well-being, mental and physical health, a sense of belonging to the place that they live or the community that they're in or their neighborhood, increased connection to earth and therefore more ownership over taking care of the earth. It sounds kind of frivolous at first, like why does a nonprofit teach people how to ride mountain bikes and do this sport? But there's actually all of these direct correlations to things that really and truly improve a person's quality of life and also improve a whole community.
That makes so much sense to me when I think about things like building the yoga community that you and I
Absolutely.
worked through. But
Yes.
yeah, I think we're craving so much connection now because we spend a lot of time on screens. And so, certainly, anything that gets people outside and meeting like-minded people. Now, if you're willing to share, I don't know if it was that endeavor or something else, but what were the warning signs for you as you started to get more into the burnout space?
I think that the warning signs that came first were physical. And at the time, I didn't have a concept of listening to my body. I started running low grade fevers quite often. I would wake up on a Saturday morning and be like, I don't feel very good. Do I have a fever? And I would be running like 99.4 to 99.9 fevers often. And so that was really weird. Chronic headaches, chronic fatigue, and also an inability to fall asleep and stay asleep. Those were kind of like the big physical signs. And those came first, I would say. And then there was, of course, and I have like so much love and empathy for anyone else who's been here, but like the anxiety and depression. And for a long time, I thought that I had mild anxiety and depression. And then thankfully, I had some really good friends who I trusted and just like very lovingly were like, I think you have severe anxiety and depression. And I think that it's time to seek out help. And so for me, what that looked like was like ruminating over mistakes that I made and just not being able to let go of those mistakes, playing out conversations in my head that were just hypothetical conversations that would likely never even happen, taking everything personally, even things that like weren't related to me whatsoever, being hyper vigilant about everything that I was doing and like beyond perfection.
Mm.
And then being extremely hard on myself, and as a result, also being extremely hard on the people around me. And I can only tell you all of this in hindsight. Like, I
Right.
had no idea I was barreling towards burnout. I thought I was hustling, doing the boss babe thing, grinding to the top, climbing the ladder. Like, I just thought I was doing all of the things that you're supposed to do. And in 2023 was when I was really like, okay, enough is enough.
Yeah. I know we are both sensitive souls, and our empathy is such a superpower,
Yes.
and it also can make us maybe more vulnerable to some of these things that yeah, it just like you said, I feel like I'm going through this in my menopause journey and kind of being at the pinnacle of my career and doing all these things and having to take that time out for myself to figure out how to create more balance, how to heal. At the time that all of this was happening, what all was on your plate? Or how many, as my doctor puts it, spinning plates? How many plates did you have spinning?
Way too many. I was working full time at a for profit company, working 40 to 60 hours a week, often more, a very high pressure situation. And then I was trying to keep All Bikes Welcome running on the side. And I had also transitioned to the board chair at this time. So I'm running a board of directors. My coping strategy that I would not recommend was training as an endurance athlete for ultra long distance cycling and also racing in a season when what I really needed was to be gentle with myself and kind and probably like have a 30-minute daily yoga practice. I was always working as fast as I possibly could so I could get to my training ride, which was usually, I mean, they were never under an hour. And sometimes they were 4, 5, 6 hours. I was absolutely killing myself on the bicycle. If you're exercising that hard and working that hard and not sleeping, your immune system fails. I also, around this time, developed a severe inflammatory response to gluten, which I think we also know now that women, especially in their 20s, when this is how they're living and operating, become very susceptible to developing autoimmune issues. And I'm sure there's more going on that I'm not thinking about. I was in a relationship, it was long distance. So I was going back and forth between Kansas and Arkansas. I was living in Arkansas at the time. And so much was on my plate. And oh my gosh, what I would do to just like cradle 25-year-old Beckie and be like, let's pick something and just ditch it. I promise you're going to be okay. I see how hard you're working. Let's give you a little break. What do you want to get rid of?
Yes. And again, that's the conversation that 50-year-old Christy is having with herself right now. And I think you're never too late. And I want to encourage my listeners
Absolutely.
because we probably are, a little more in my age range, but like it's never too late to make that decision for yourself,
Absolutely.
which is certainly what I did when I chose to leave corporate last year. But I am proud of you for recognizing at the point that you did that you needed to heal. So what did that start to look like?
Yeah, thank you. I think too, for people my age, it's coming faster because the demands of work and computer, email, phone, text, Zoom,
Yes.
Instagram, LinkedIn, Facebook. I think the burnout is coming a lot sooner for us. And
True.
also, we have this like amazing connectivity to one another that is helping us realize a lot earlier in life and that we can't keep living like this. So, a couple of things that I did right out of the gate. I had been in therapy for 3 years already before I like really got intentional about my healing journey. But I was in cognitive behavioral therapy, which is an amazing resource. I didn't understand that there are multiple different therapeutic interventions and modalities that help with different things. I switched from cognitive behavioral therapy to a trauma informed therapist who uses EMDR and somatic experiencing. So that was the one of the first major changes that I made. And that first, oh my gosh, that first outreach to a new therapist or your first therapist ever can feel like such a big undertaking. And so my heart also goes out to anyone who is like in the process of finding their first or new therapist. Because it is like a big deal and a very sensitive endeavor. The second change that I made was working on my sleep hygiene. I was like, I have to sleep. I have to be able to fall asleep. I have to be able to stay asleep and I have to be able to wake up rested. None of those three things were happening in my life. I started doing the things, even though it felt annoying and it felt like a lot. I started putting the phone in the bathroom at 8 p.m. That was 3 years ago. I still do it. I bought an alarm clock, so I don't need the phone to wake me up. The alarm clock also
Mm.
has a red light. So I turn that red light on around 7:30, 8 p.m. and slowly throughout the evening just start turning off more and more lights in my space until like red light is the only thing on. I try to get in bed at 9 o'clock and I read for a little bit until I fall asleep. I also worked with a nutritionist for a little bit because I was getting to sleep, but I couldn't stay asleep. And so she helped me build a supplement routine and also gave me some insights about my blood sugar that were contributing to my not being able to stay asleep. And then I started waking up at the same time every single day, even when I was completely exhausted. 6 a.m. And I it has changed my life. I cannot overstate enough how important good sleep is, especially to those of us who are ambitious. I was talking with my coach and a good friend, and something she said to me the other day was in the world of entrepreneurship, a rested body is a competitive advantage
Interesting.
because
Yeah.
so many other people in this space are exhausting themselves and continuing to work through exhaustion, and that has them operating in a very reactive space. Whereas those of us who are carving out the time to stay on top of our rest actually come to work clear headed and from a more responsive and intentional space than if we were not rested. And I think the same is true for nonprofit leaders as well. And I think that's such a beautiful way of thinking about it, especially for ambitious people. Like rest can feel like, oh my gosh, I'm going to get behind, when in reality, that's just not true. We have to be
Yes.
rested.
There are so many processes that take place while we sleep, and
So
we
many.
can't discount those. We can't shortcut those. It is so important. And you already have me sort of rethinking my sleep hygiene, but I'm I'm pretty good. When I lived in Phoenix, Arizona, the sun comes up before 5 a.m. during the summer. And
Mhm.
I started waking up with the sun and started at that point. So that was more than 10 years ago, sort of following my circadian rhythm and became a morning person where I never had been before and
Mhm.
stuck with that. And so I find that if I start to feel tired, I know I need to back up my bedtime because I know I'm going to wake up 5:30 or 6 no matter what. I'm grateful for my solid sleep, but I know what it's definitely how it feels to have those restless nights. And so, you told me recently that it took a good year to feel better.
Yeah.
right?
Yeah. It
You,
took a good year to start feeling better, I would say. So I also moved. The place I was living was a very corporate town, and I have some incredible relationships and friendships that are still there. But for me personally, I needed to remove myself from that space and go somewhere that felt safer and quieter. So I moved back to my hometown, which is where we met, Hico,
yes,
Texas. I live in the country now, and every day from my desk, I look out and there's a pond and there's cattle. Right now we have 6 calves that are so cute, so they're usually running around and it's so peaceful.
yes.
And so there was definitely, as soon as I moved back, a settling that happened. And that sleep hygiene actually came faster than I would have expected. I felt the nervous system start to take breaks. I believe I had been in fight or flight mode for about 7 years prior to that, and it was still often activated, but I would get these little breaks. I also felt this curiosity come back. So my first spring back in Texas, when the wildflowers went crazy, I was like, I wonder how many species of wildflowers are here. I'm just going to go count. I wonder what the names of these wildflowers are. I'm going to get a book. And I think that the reason that was significant for me is because there was a past version of myself who really moved through the world with a lot of curiosity. And she had not had space to exist for those
Mm,
7 years that I was stuck in fight or flight mode. And so the first year, it was those very small things coming back online. And then in years 2 and 3, I think this July will be the end of year 3. Life has just bloomed, for lack of a better term, and my health has just I describe it as compound interest. Like, you notice little increments and little improvements, and then once you've been taking care of yourself really well for 2 years, it's like
wow. Yeah.
at least that's been my experience. I mean, I love who I am now. I love how I feel inside of my body and my brain. I love that peace and calm is my default as opposed to frenzy and panic. And so, even when things aren't going well, like the consulting business went through a really difficult 12 months after the election, which is pretty normal regardless of like what party is taking office. Nonprofits budgets tend to freeze around
Mm,
election cycles, and in the first year of a new administration, there are a lot of different cuts to different departments, and that impacts federal funding. So things were far from perfect for 12 months in the middle of this journey, but I was still able to maintain some semblance of defaulting to peace and calm, which I feel super grateful for. In part, thanks also to the yoga studio, because having a mindful practice during the good seasons and then also that you can turn to in the bad seasons is such a grounding force in a dark time. So thank you
yes.
for that.
Well, I love that we were on that path together for the 2 years that I had the studio, that I
Mhm.
operated it. I recently interviewed a woman named Bree who has a business called Practicing Wellness in the attorney space, and so helping law firms with incorporate wellness. And one thing she pointed out, which I hear from you, is you serve your clients better when you are in a better place. And so I'm sure that your clients have tremendous benefit from you being in such a healthy place. It's kind of the whole oxygen mask analogy. I mean, you've put yours on first and then you can serve others, and so they get a beautifully calm and a peaceful Becky to help them on the journey, and I'm sure that helps our energy transfers. And
Absolutely.
so I have to think too that then you're helping alleviate all of those fears and anxieties that they have when they're navigating a new journey, trying to get a new grant, all of these things that are probably really scary and anxiety inducing as a nonprofit.
Yeah. It's funny that you mention our energy transfers. I believe that so much. Someone once told me that if you're on a call or in a meeting and there's one unregulated person that can impact the regulation in the whole room. But the same is also true if everyone in the room is very like frantic and panicked, but there's one regulated person grounding in truth, grounding in facts, it's possible to also like regulate the entire room. I take that very seriously in how I show up with my clients. A lot of times we're meeting on Zoom, and it can be very easy to come into a Zoom meeting just like, here I am, sorry, I just was responding to an email about this thing that's really stressful. And I try really hard not to come to meetings like that. And not only does like the energy transfer happen from me to a client, it also happens client to community. I've seen nonprofits where the leader of the nonprofit or the nonprofit staff become very apathetic to the cause, and that trickles into the community to where the whole community starts to feel apathetic to like everyone else, and that community can almost isolate themselves. So again, I work with like a lot of outdoor recreation, sports, arts, and culture. These aren't necessarily what we would consider like essential services in the nonprofit space. I think it's so important as nonprofit leaders for us to be regulated, one, for our staff, and then two, for our communities. Our communities are already under duress, which is why we have nonprofits to step in and help alleviate some of that suffering and stress. So I kind of went down a rabbit hole there, but yes, absolutely. Also, kudos to your friend for doing that in like the legal space. That's amazing.
Yes, she said there's a lot of imbalance there, 70, 80-hour work weeks. And like you said earlier, when we're in it, we don't see it. I think about last summer when I was in the throes of menopause and my hormones were going haywire and I was doing all these things and I said, it's all lighting me up. It's all purpose driven. So it's not too much. And now I'm looking back and seeing, well, I also was going through a lot of rewiring of my brain chemistry that I just needed to settle down from. So I can't fault anyone who's in that space and thinking just do one more thing and one more thing and one more thing and it's okay. So starting small, carving out that time to find the little practices that bring us joy. It doesn't have to be an hour walk. It doesn't have to be an hour in the gym. It could be 10 minutes. It could be,
Yeah.
walking to the mailbox. I go out to my garage and I do bicep curls. And if that's all I
Yes.
do in a day to lift weights, and that's,
Yes.
doing one small thing every day. And I think we'll find that, eventually those things start to feel better. We start to carve out more time and sort of
Absolutely.
recover from that burnout space.
I love James Clear. Have you read Atomic Habits?
I have not, but I'm very familiar with his work.
Yes.
Yeah.
So, his whole thing is like, we don't rise to the level of our goals, we fall to the level of our systems. And one of the things he talks about a lot is exercise. And exactly like you just said, he's like, if you're trying to get into a workout routine, walk for 10 minutes. Do bicep curls every single day. Just don't skip. Build the consistency, become the person who does 3 sets of 8 bicep curls every single day. And 2 years from now, watch who you become on top of that. And I love that so much. And I relied on James Clear's principles a lot. So I mentioned switching my therapy modalities, working on my sleep hygiene. And I think I didn't mention that I also was like, okay, walk every day. And I would
Mm,
walk 3/4 of a mile from my house to the highway and back. So a mile and a half total. And
yeah.
even if I didn't do any other exercise on top of that for 2 weeks, I just kept making that walk. 'Cause
That's
that's how it
incredible.
starts. That's how it
It's
starts.
Yeah. And walking has so many benefits. One of my core habits is to go outside and get my sunshine.
Yeah,
And, even if it's cloudy, being outside for 10 minutes. I get to pet the cats. And that's been sort of my non-negotiable lately is getting outside early and getting
I love it.
that sunlight. And you are a very talented photographer. And so that's a hobby turned strong interest for you. Was that something that you always were interested in, that you rekindled that, or was that a newfound passion?
So I would say it was the year before COVID, so 2019. I was visiting a friend down in Austin, Texas, and I had already been playing a lot with iPhone photography. And I said, I think I would really like to learn photography. And she goes, hold on. And she goes into her room. I hear like rustling around, and she brings this tote bag out, and she's like, do you want a camera like this? And I open it, and it's a DSLR camera. It's a Canon, and she had already owned it for several years at that time that she gave it to me. I still own that camera. It's what I shoot all of my photos on. It is a beginner Canon DSLR camera that is probably, I don't know, 15 years old at least. And I took to that camera so quickly. And because I already had an understanding of the basics, I was able to watch YouTube videos and like pick it up super quick. It happened so naturally. I honestly didn't even realize it was happening. How I just started paying attention to like light and colors and angles and shadows. And I loved photographing nature. I'm outside all of the time. And I have this curiosity for like plants, wildlife, flowers, trees. And I just started like, ooh, can I take a cool picture of the bark? Oh, can I take a cool picture of the leaf? Can I photograph this flower from an angle that people don't normally photograph flowers? You've seen my yellow flowers that I actually shot.
Yes.
I like put the camera underneath the flowers. And so I became so enthralled by this hobby. And I will say that even when I was in the depths of burnout, it just became such a part of me, that camera did, that I never really stopped, which I think is kind of beautiful. And I also really fell in love with the camera because it gave me a way to capture the world that wasn't my phone.
Mm,
And I
yes.
think there is something in us that really compels us to capture things. We used to do that through like writing in journals, drawing in journals, watercolors, film cameras. Now we pretty much all have the opportunity to do that with our phones, which is really special. But I love encouraging people to get a camera because it is more of like, it's not analog, but it kind of feels analog compared to your phone.
Yes, it does still feel a little bit analog. I feel like we do more with it than you might when you've got, 10,000 photos on your phone. In fact, I've got, oh, it's going to blur out, but anyone who's watching, I've got the
I know
Santa
what photo that
Fe,
is.
yeah, one from a building in Santa Fe. So I think that I just wanted, yeah, you talked earlier about the curiosity and how
Yeah.
that led you, and that you followed that thread, and then the photography, and I feel like we've just kind of keep coming back to this theme of joy and finding things that bring you joy.
Yeah.
And so anyone who can just follow that thread of curiosity to a new hobby. I happened to see, I was on a networking call with somebody, and they had watercolor framed and behind them, and I thought, I bought a watercolor book that I still haven't done anything with. I need to
Yeah.
get that out. So, yeah, just following those little threads to ways that we can unplug. Oh, is beautiful. And anyone who wants to follow that thread of curiosity, giving back to their community, how do we do more for nonprofits?
Yeah. Such a beautiful question. I would say, and you mentioned this, like we probably all have a connection to at least one nonprofit. Even if you are in a rural town and you're the dad of the star football player at the high school, there's probably an athletic foundation or like an education foundation that supports your high school. Every town typically has an animal shelter, a food pantry, a thrift store. Even a lot of small towns have museums, and all of these entities are looking for donations. It could be a financial donation, it could be a donation of your time if you volunteer for them, it could be a donation of your resources if you're like, hey, food pantry, could you use a truck? I have this old farm truck that's not getting used anymore. Those are easy ways to get involved. What are you already involved in? What are you already giving your time and efforts to? And is there a nonprofit entity that you could also support who's doing the same work? I love outdoor recreation. I think people need access to nature and I think people need access to adventure. That's kind of like my own personal philosophy. And so there are multiple nonprofits in the outdoor recreation and sports space that I donate to. Just ask yourself, what do I really care about? What do I think that everyone should have access to? Is it books, literature? Is it film? Is it photography? Is it classical music? Is it food, shelter? Whatever it is, there is a nonprofit that exists probably closer to you than you realize that's working on it, and they would absolutely love your support.
I think too about things like special events. When I talked to the director of the Archway, they have special events a couple of times a year, and so it might be if you struggle with the time commitment for a regular volunteering opportunity, maybe it's you volunteer for a special event once a
Yeah.
year or something like that.
Yeah.
So yeah, there are ways that you can support and not feel like it's a chore, because I know when I was volunteering for Meals on Wheels, that would people would be like, "Oh, I just don't have the time." And I get it, a weekly commitment was a lot, but there are other one-off event types that you can help with. So
Yeah.
amazing. Well, I knew we would have a lot to talk about, and then we didn't scratch the surface on some things like yoga, but I wanted you to share your experience in the nonprofit space because I think that it does have such appeal, especially to someone like me who's just has always tried to volunteer my time, but understanding what happens sort of behind the scenes and knowing that there are people like you out there who can help navigate these different challenges of a nonprofit, and so they can hire a consultant like you to help. I love to ask my guests at the end of each show, this is Rock the Damn Boat, and we're highlighting the stories of people who have rocked the boat or advocated for themselves or for others. So I want to ask you, who is your boat rocking role model?
I feel like this is an obvious answer, but I would say Brene Brown. She, to me, is someone who identified her values. And when everyone else in her industry was like, vulnerability is not an important piece of leadership, she stood by it and was like, yes, it absolutely is. She has this fabulous story of when she's speaking to a group in the military. And she asked this question like, who in here can tell me one time that you had to do something courageous that didn't also require vulnerability? And she said the room was just silent. And I think someone eventually stands up and it's like, ma'am, I can't tell you any time that. And so it's this amazing story. And why it inspires me is because there are a lot of people in the nonprofit space who continue to believe we just can't pay people well. People work in the nonprofit space because it's what they care about, not because they're trying to make money. We have all of these reasons that we don't pay people in the nonprofit space well. And then we look around and wonder why the heck nonprofits are spinning and they have high turnover and everyone's burnt out and their impact isn't as big as we think it should be. I stand by the fact that nonprofit professionals deserve living and comfortable wages, despite the fact that many people in my industry, many of whom have decades more experience than I do, refuse to consider that. And I'm like, well, if Brene Brown can stand on this, I can also stand on this. And so I think she's such an inspiration. Obviously, she does all this amazing work in organizational transformation and leadership, but I think the most impactful thing about her to me is her origin story of how she got to this place, which was like, hell no, this is my value. This is my belief. This is all of the evidence that I have to say that this is true, and you're not going to convince me otherwise. And I'm not going to
Wow.
back down.
Yes. Well, I applaud that mission and that stance for you. I love that you are propelling that message from a place that is healed and calm and peaceful, and that you can, help people in the nonprofit space and outside of it to understand that and understand why nonprofits need our help. So, Becky, it's been such a treat having you on, having this conversation, even for me, learning more about your healing journey, because I met you, at a place where you had recognized these things in yourself and you were well on your way. And I'm grateful to you for being a part of the yoga community, but I am also grateful for this conversation today and want to thank everyone who listened to the show today. Thanks, Becky.
Thank you, Christy, and thank you for carving out this space for this conversation. It was such a joy.
You've been listening to Rock the Damn Boat, a podcast produced and recorded by Christy Hughes. You can follow, subscribe on both Apple and Spotify, and your 5-star review goes a long way. Thank you so much for your support of the show.